The moment the glass door slowed instead of slamming shut, something inside her chest tightened in a way she hadn't prepared for, as if an old memory had reached out and taken her by the wrist before she could pull away. She had been walking too fast, rehearsing polite smiles and safe excuses, already half convinced this blind date would be another quiet disappointment, when she noticed a man she barely knew holding the door open with an almost unconscious patience, waiting for her, as if time itself could afford to pause. In that small, ordinary gesture, she felt the sting of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. What if this happened to you, when you least expected it? Would you notice it, or would you rush past it the way she almost did? Her name was Rebecca Moore, and she lived in a cramped apartment outside Columbus, Ohio, where the walls were thin and the nights were long enough to replay every regret she carried. She had said yes to the blind date only because her sister wouldn't stop asking, only because it felt easier than explaining how tired she was of trying and failing and pretending she wasn't. She had dressed carefully but without hope, wearing red not to impress but to remind herself she was still visible. The man at the door was named Nathan Walker, a name she had heard only once over a phone call filled with awkward pauses. She hadn't imagined him like this, calm and steady, holding a door as if it mattered who walked through after him. They stepped inside a small downtown restaurant, the kind that tried to look warm with dim lights and wood tables, though the city outside pressed cold against the windows. Rebecca carried the weight of a past that had taught her to expect less. Years earlier, she had stayed too long in a marriage that slowly erased her voice, a life where kindness came in rare conditional moments. When it ended, it left behind not relief but exhaustion, the kind that settles into the bones. Dating after that had felt like reopening a wound just to prove it still hurt. She wondered, as she followed Nathan inside, if she was making the same mistake again, trusting something small when experience told her not to. Nathan had his own quiet history, though she didn't know it yet. He had lost his mother young, learned early how absence could shape a person, how small acts were sometimes the only way to say what words couldn't carry. Holding the door wasn't chivalry to him, it was habit, survival, a way of honoring the world when it had once felt indifferent. He noticed the way Rebecca hesitated, the way her eyes flicked toward the exit before she committed to walking fully inside. If you were in her place, would you have turned back then, telling yourself you didn't need another almost? The evening moved forward without dramatic moments, just long stretches of conversation that felt unexpectedly easy. Rebecca spoke about her work at a local library, about the comfort she found in organizing stories when her own had felt scattered. Nathan talked about construction jobs that changed with the seasons, about the satisfaction of building something solid with his hands. There were silences too, but they didn't feel heavy. They felt like space, like permission to breathe. Still, beneath it all, Rebecca stayed guarded, waiting for the moment when disappointment would arrive, because it always did. As the night wore on, something subtle shifted. She caught herself laughing without measuring the sound, caught herself leaning forward instead of pulling back. She noticed how Nathan listened without trying to fix her, how he didn't rush to fill every pause. It scared her more than any obvious red flag would have. Emotional safety had become unfamiliar territory. The hardest thing, she realized, wasn't being hurt again. It was the risk of being seen and finding out she still wanted connection after everything she'd been through. When they finally stood to leave, the air outside had grown colder, the streetlights casting long reflections across the wet pavement. Rebecca felt that familiar urge to retreat, to thank him politely and disappear back into her life before hope could root itself too deeply. But then it happened again. Nathan reached the door first and held it open, not looking at her as if he expected gratitude, not making it a moment. He simply waited. And in that pause, she saw all the doors that had been closed in her life, all the times she had been rushed through decisions, dismissed, or left behind emotionally. This time, someone waited. Something cracked open inside her then, not loudly, but enough to let warmth seep through. She realized she had spent years believing she had to endure love. that patience was something she owed others but rarely received in return. Standing there, she wondered how many chances she had missed by assuming kindness was temporary. If you had been there, would you have let yourself feel it? Or would you have told yourself it meant nothing? They walked to their cars without promises, without declarations, just two people sharing the quiet of a night that felt gentler than most. Rebecca drove home with her hands shaking on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar weight of possibility. She didn't tell herself this was the beginning of anything. She only admitted that for the first time in a long while she didn't feel invisible. That alone felt like a small miracle. Weeks passed, then months, marked not by grand gestures but by consistency. Nathan showed up when he said he would. Rebecca learned how hard it was to let someone see her on bad days, not just the polished version she had perfected. There were moments of doubt, moments when old habits whispered that it wouldn't last. But each time, there was patience. There was waiting. There was another door held open, literal or otherwise. Gradual change didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like trust building quietly, brick by brick. 1. Evening, long after that first blind date had softened into memory. Rebecca stood in her kitchen watching rain streak down the window, realizing how different her life felt. Not perfect, not free of pain, but steadier. She understood then that love hadn't arrived all at once. It had entered slowly, the way light does at dawn, unnoticed until suddenly everything is visible. She thought about how close she had come to walking past that door, how easily she could have missed the moment that reminded her she was worth waiting for. Before the story ends, take a moment and tell us in the comments, has a small, quiet act of kindness ever changed the direction of your life when you least expected it? Rebecca never claimed that one held door saved her, but she knew it reminded her of something essential, that she still mattered, that gentleness could exist without conditions, and that second chances often arrive disguised as ordinary moments. If this story stirred something in you, if it made you think about the doors you've walked through or walked past, please like, comment, share, and subscribe, but only if it truly touched your heart and reminded you of the power of patience, kindness, and choosing to stay open when it's hardest to do so.